Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started. Just a couple of housekeeping things. Everyone is muted, so please type your questions in the chat box, and we will get to as many questions as we can, both during the presentation, and we'll have some time after the presentation to verbally ask some questions and answer them. Any questions we don't get to, we are gathering those and working on a way to share back out that information. A reminder that this webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on our website afterwards. And I'm going to put the link to the website in the chat. For those of you who can't see the chat, if you go to our main page for the COVID-19 page, on the healthcare section, there's a section for COVID-19 vaccines, and you can find the recordings there. The webinars are limited to 1,000 participants, and once we reach that capacity, people will no longer be able to join, but they will be able to watch the recording and still get their CEUs. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Kathleen.
Hi there, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. So thank you for that introduction. This afternoon, I'm Kathleen Seaman. I'm one of the nurses I work with in the vaccine COVID-19 branch currently. And I'm like I said, one of the nurses. I'm a public health advisor. So this afternoon, I'm going to talk about potential COVID-19 vaccines. Okay, so the objectives for this afternoon, first we're going to list 3 different ways a COVID-19 vaccine product might be stored based on the manufacturer requirement. Second, describe at least 2 ways the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine product differs and how vaccines are usually dosed and stored. And third, explain which activity you will use to remind patients about getting their second COVID-19 vaccine dose with the same product. Next slide. Well, healthcare workers are critical to our healthcare system. This group is a major focus in prioritizing who should receive COVID-19 vaccine first when it becomes available. In fact, this afternoon, the ACIP, or the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, will be meeting to discuss the priority group and the different phases that we will be distributing vaccines. So there's more to come on that. So as healthcare workers, you have the opportunity to receive vaccine and also to administer it to your patients. So in that respect, you're a very important role model in becoming vaccinated against COVID-19 and being able to, administer it to others. And I want to do a little mention and call out about flu illness because it is flu season and we have COVID-19 cases surging. So if you haven't gotten your flu shot yet, it would be really important that you do that as soon as possible because we don't really know or hasn't been reported yet if there needs to be an interval between COVID-19 vaccine and any other vaccine. So please get vaccinated against flu if you haven't yet. Next slide. I want to talk a little bit about the upcoming COVID-19 vaccines, and I'm sure many of you have heard about these. And I've broken them down by how they're stored. The first one is the ultra-cold storage. So this would be the Pfizer-BioNTech product, and they did apply for emergency use authorization, or an EUA, on November 20th. We have another product from Moderna, which is stored frozen, and they just applied for emergency use authorization on November 30th. And then refrigerated vaccines. There is another product from AstraZeneca Oxford that did announce some promising data on November 23rd. So as Lynn mentioned in her webinar talk last week, there's like over 200 vaccine candidates for COVID-19 vaccine, and many of them are in phase 3 trials. So there'll be a lot more probably coming down the pipe, a lot more information coming out about new vaccines. Next slide. So I want to talk about the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine first. And as I mentioned, this one is stored at ultra-cold temperatures, so minus 60 to minus 80 degrees Celsius, or minus 76 degrees to minus 112 degrees Fahrenheit. And it can be stored in the ultra-cold freezer for up to 6 months. Or the vaccine is shipped in what's called a thermal shipper. And this thermal shipper can be used for temporary storage or storing the vaccine up to 15 days at these ultra-cold temperatures. And just a little bit more information about the thermal shipper. It does need to be re-iced with pelleted dry ice initially, so within 24 hours, and then every 5 days. It can only be opened twice a day for 3 minutes during each opening. The vaccine can also be stored in the refrigerator, but it has limited time that it can be in the refrigerator. And this is our usual refrigerator temperatures of 2 to 8 degrees Celsius or 36 to 46 degrees Fahrenheit. So it can be stored at these temperatures for up to 120 hours, which is 5 days. But after that time frame is up, that vaccine does need, any unused vaccine needs to be discarded. It can also be at room temperature, and the vials actually do need to be thawed before they're reconstituted or mixed with diluent. So any thawed vials must be reconstituted within 2 hours. Once it has been reconstituted, it must be used within 6 hours. Otherwise, it has to be discarded. And it's reconstituted with 1 milliliters of 0.9% sodium chloride per injection. And this diluent ships separately, as well as ancillary kits will also be shipped separately. The presentation is a multi-dose vial, and it has 5 doses per vial in it. The minimum order for this vaccine is 975 doses. So you can see, based on how this vaccine needs to be stored and the minimum order, that there needs to be very careful planning when you start your day with this vaccine, because of some of the limitations with how often it can be opened and how long it can be opened once you open the shipper. So those are things that keep in mind. This vaccine is also 2 doses that patients receive at 0 and 21 days. It's given intramuscularly, or IM, and the dose is 0.3 ml for each dose. So a little bit different than our usual routine vaccinations that we give. Next slide. The other product that just applies for EUA authorization is the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine product. And this one is stored in the freezer at minus 25 to minus 15 degrees Celsius, or minus 13 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit. And this can be stored in the freezer at these temperatures for 6 months. But I do want you to kind of note that this temperature range is a little bit narrower than we have for our varicella-containing vaccine. So not quite as cold. It can also be stored in the refrigerator at the usual refrigerator temperatures that we have for vaccines, and it can be stored in there for 30 days. And this one can also be stored at room temperature up to 12 hours. The presentation, these are also multi-dose vials, but this one has 10 doses per multi-dose vial, and the minimum order is 100 doses. Patients receive 2 doses at an interval of 0 and 28 days, and it's given IM, and this dose is 0.5 ml. And there is no reconstitution required for this vaccine. Next slide. So a little bit more information about what we currently know about COVID-19 vaccine. So this vaccine, both products at this time, will be indicated for persons who are 18 years and older. And that's it's not going to be indicated for anybody under that age because children have not been studied fully, so they will not be eligible for this vaccine, at least in the beginning, until there's more studies out and it's approved for their use. As far as that vaccine efficacy, the preliminary data has looked very promising. So both for the Pfizer product and the Moderna product, they were about 95% effective. And the AstraZeneca data has looked like that's about 90% effective. Both Pfizer and Moderna had large clinical trials of about 30,000 up to 40,000 participants. They did also include many participants with diverse backgrounds. So again, very promising data that's coming out there. And we'll hear more about that when everybody, different bodies get to meet, the FDA and then ACIP. Probably the most important thing I wanted to talk about on this slide is the immune response or the side effects, because it's important for you to know, and also for your patients, that to expect an immune response to these vaccines, that this is normal. Patients should expect, to have some pain at the injection site. They may have that. They may have some redness at the injection site. They could also feel tired or have fatigue, maybe some muscle and joint pain. They could have a headache. These symptoms should be pretty self-limiting. They should last about 1 to 2 days and then go away. So it's really important that you educate patients because you want them to come back for their second dose. They really need to have that second dose so they build a really good immune response. If anybody has a really severe reaction, they should call their healthcare provider, and then that should get reported as well. And then as far as contraindications and precautions, those more details are following regarding those. We'll need to hear about them. It's likely a contraindication for these vaccines would be a severe reaction to the first dose, and likely a precaution would be acute illness. Next slide. So I talked a little bit about second dose reminders because it is just so important that patients receive their 2 doses spaced apart appropriately with the same product they received for their initial dose. So some ways you can make sure people get their second dose. There will be a COVID-19 vaccine card that will come with your supplies, and that's something that you should complete for every patient prior to leaving. You could also ask them to take if they have a smartphone, they could take a picture of the vaccine card so that in case they lose their card, they have a picture of it. They can use our Minnesota Immunization Registry, or MIC, to pull a list for those who are due for their second dose. Or maybe you have your own tool that you could use, that you use for patient recall reminders for immunization. And of course, text messaging, phone calls, emails and mail, those all can be used as well. The other thing I want to talk about is a new tool that CDC has developed. It's called V-Safe. V is in Victor, so V-Safe. And that is a smartphone-based application that uses text messaging and web surveys. So what it does is it checks in with those who have received the COVID-19 vaccine, but patients have to sign up for this or enroll in the program to be able to have these check-ins. It does provide second dose reminders, and it also does provide live phone follow-up through VAERS, which is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. So if they missed work or they had to see a provider because they were sick following vaccination, there will be this live phone follow-up. So where healthcare workers really play an important role is to actually give the patient a Be Safe information sheet. It's like a hard copy of it. And then also CDC will provide a counseling script so that you know how to educate or tell your patients about this program. Next slide. There are a lot of COVID-19 vaccine resources that are either have been developed or in development. NVH is we are creating an interim COVID-19 vaccine provider guide, and this will be basically kind of a one-stop shop for everything related to COVID-19 vaccine. It will be updated as new vaccines come on board, so be looking out for that. We're also developing online COVID-19 vaccine provider training. And the CDC also has a lot of good resources as well, and I did put their website on the slide. But I also have a screenshot of the top half of basically around a 4-page document that has links embedded in it. So if you are, need a refresher on vaccine administration, there is a whole section on that. And then towards the end of the document, there will be vaccine-specific product information from each company or each vaccine that will also have lots of resources listed as well. And the last thing I want to talk about here is about EUA fact sheets. So for those of us who have, been very familiar with immunizing people, we are very familiar with vaccine information statements or VISs. And with a vaccine that's authorized for emergency use, there will be no VIS. Instead, there is EUA fact sheets. And so there will be one for patients, and this will be very similar to a VIS. It is something that you will need to give to the patient prior to vaccinating them. But there will also be an EUA fact sheet for providers. And this one will come with the vaccine. And this is very similar to the package insert that we're used to seeing with vaccine products. Those will be available once the vaccine comes out and is authorized. Next slide. So before I leave you today, a few takeaways. I just really want to stress that there are some differences in how we usually handle and store vaccine. There's different requirements and different dosing requirements. So I think it's going to be really important for you to follow those EUA provider fact sheets that come with the vaccine. Use your resources. NDH and CDC is creating many documents and tools to help you store and administer the vaccine safely. Just really, really want to stress and thank you for the, healthcare workers, the role that you play in COVID-19 vaccine. In receiving it, we strongly recommend that you receive the vaccine and also in administering it to your patients. So, again, we strongly encourage people to get vaccinated when that vaccine is available so that you stay healthy for yourself, for your family, for your patients. And then just be flexible, be nimble as vaccine information is changing and being updated frequently. As I mentioned, ACIP is meeting this afternoon. We'll have more materials to update, and so it's just it's a challenging time to kind of keep up to date, but do the best you can. And so with that, next slide. I want to thank you for attending this webinar today. Next slide. And so now we'll have some question and answer time. And I'm also inviting Nancy Grunsrud. She's one of my colleagues. She's been kind of looking at that chat box, and we'll do some questions. So I invite Nancy to hop on. And
thanks, Kathleen. So I think there's definitely a theme to some of the questions. So I will probably go through and kind of answer some of those themes a little bit. So there's lots of questions about the exact timing of the vaccines, that 21 days and 28 days. There are questions about the side effects, and if people are having some of those side effects, what does that mean in terms of being excluded from work? And then there's some other questions about the exact age range that the vaccines are approved for. And all of those things are questions that will come out of this approval process. So the way this works is the Food and Drug Administration evaluates the vaccine and it will probably approve it under what we call the emergency use authorization, that's what EUA stands for, emergency use authorization. And it means that in a pandemic situation, we can look at specific vaccines to see if the benefits of the vaccine outweigh the risks of what we don't know at this point, so that we can protect people against a disease that we don't have any other treatment for. So that's basically what's being done on December 10th. And then once it goes through the FDA, it will go to the Advisory Council on Immunization Practices, or the ACIP, which is the group that from the Center for Disease Control that evaluates all our vaccines that we give in the United States and makes very specific recommendations about those vaccines. And when they will approve it, and then they make specific recommendations. So it'll be their recommendation as far as what should we do with those people that have a low-grade fever or muscle aches that are right after the vaccine? Do we need to, how should we monitor those people? What do we need to be making a plan? Those are recommendations that scientific group will be telling us. And so we don't know the answers to those questions until we see what their recommendations are. So they meet, and then they publish those recommendations. And, as soon as we have those recommendations, we will be sharing that information and talking to people, and that's part of the training that we're going to do, once we know what vaccines are actually available. So likewise, it'll be their recommendation whether the vaccines have to be given at exactly the same time interval, or we can do it plus or minus a certain amount of time. It'll be their recommendations about age groups. It'll be their recommendations about those very specific things. So at this point in time, we just don't know that. And really we are making some assumptions that these two vaccines that have applied for the emergency use authorization are going to get approved, but we don't actually know that until we get that final approval. So we can't, we just don't have specifics that we can train and share with people about what those recommendations are until those vaccines are actually approved, and the people who are the smartest and have the best knowledge about vaccines are going to be able to share it with us. So likewise, one of the questions is about what about people who have already had COVID? And again, I think that the recommendation is going to be that people probably should be vaccinated, but maybe don't need to be in the first group because they probably have at least some immunity. We don't know how long either a natural immunity after you get the disease lasts, or immunity after we get vaccinated is going to last. So those are things that we're going to have to gather, information that we're going to gather in the coming months to determine, do people need another dose, some of those kind of things. So, is COVID vaccine going to be something that we need a yearly booster like we do for flu vaccine? We don't know at this point in time. I think, how long this immunity is going to last, we just really don't know. So that's kind of, that is where we are right now. That, there are a lot of unknowns, and we're just not going to have a lot of those answers until we actually see what the CDC is recommending. A couple people have asked, is this a live vaccine? No, it's not a live vaccine. It's actually made with some new technology that's called mRNA technology, and there's some really good information about how that has been being developed on the CDC's website. So if you're really into, the biology of viral vectors and stuff, I would encourage you to go look at their website. And then somebody asked about, could it go back in the freezer once it's been in the refrigerator? And the answer to that is no. Once the vaccine is out of either the ultra cold or the regular freezer, it needs to be stored in the refrigerator. And once it's come to that limit of how long it can be in the refrigerator, it will need to be discarded. So we really want people to be planning very carefully about how are we going to use up all that vaccine. We don't want to throw vaccine away because it's been in the refrigerator. So when we're taking it out of the freezer or the ultra cold storage, we want people to have a good plan in place for how they're going to use up that vaccine in that period of time that it's put in the refrigerator. We don't have any information either about what other vaccines people can get before or after. In the studies that they've been doing, the requirement has been that you can't get any other vaccine for 4 weeks before you get the COVID vaccine. So we don't know if that's what's going to be the recommendation or not. Again, that's a recommendation that will come out of the ACIP. So we won't be able to know. There's a couple questions about second doses. But, we don't have any information that says that one dose provides good protection. So we would want people to get the second dose. So if you get one dose and don't get the second one, it's probably not going to be good. We also would really encourage people when you're scheduling people to come in and get their vaccines, that they should get, you should give them their dose, and then they need to come back in either 21 or 28 days, depending upon which vaccine it is. So you want to be able to schedule that, before that person leaves. So hopefully set up some time so that you have as much control over that as you possibly can. And again, we know it's not going to be perfect, but we don't have any, right now we have limited data that says, when exactly you get the timing of that second vaccine and, how effective it is. So I think the recommendations will be as close to those target dates of 21 days or 28 days, depending upon which vaccine you get, but we don't have that specific information.
I'm going to cut you off, Nancy, since we are at time. Thank you so much, Kathleen and Nancy, for the presentation and answering all of the questions, and thank you to everyone who attended today. A reminder that this is recorded, and it will be on our website afterwards. You can go to our COVID-19 vaccine or COVID-19 page on MDH, and you'll find the vaccine information there. We will send out an email afterwards with an evaluation survey, and that will have a link to your CEU. If you do not get the email, please email health.covid.vaccine@state.mn.us. That's our general email inbox, and it's a great place to go if you have questions about the webinar or if you have questions about vaccine in general. So thank you again, and I hope everyone has a good rest of their day.
Yes, thank you, everyone.